With private ownership, the owner can charge people to use the field, and thus he has a personal incentive to keep the field running and keep it from collapsing. And not only keep it running, but also to improve his product and increase efficiency because that increases his own personal profit. See, his motivations aren't out of the social good, though they serve the social good. He's still acting out of self-interest. Self-interest got us into this mess, so let's lean on self-interest to get us out of this mess, right? Makes sense. And once he has an improved product, he doesn't have to accept the smaller payments anymore. He can give exclusive access to the field to the few members of the society who are able to pay a lot more for it, and turn away those who can't. Since Zeke, Ralph, and Abe were all cheating in the old system, they have a little bit more surplus wealth to be able to afford this kind of exclusive service. And with exclusive access and access to these new and improved products, this is beneficial to them as well. And they can acquire new assets from those desperate to sell. And he can continue to grow his wealth and grow his kingdom until he has enough wealth to go ahead and purchase his own lot and his own field. And this community growth allows them to grow as a community and welcome in new members that now that they have more production to allow for a bigger population. And the economy grows and grows as more investors come in and they pour their wealth back into the economy by buying goods. Everybody wins. Well, not everybody. Aside from the gross inequality created by such a system, that is inherent in such a system, it also isn't really solving the problem of the tragedy of the commons. It's just pushing it upward. Because now when there's a drought, the various landowners get together and they agree that, hey guys, we're gonna need to reduce our water consumption by 25% each. And our fields are each gonna take a little bit of a hit and it's gonna slow down our growth. But as long as we all do this collectively, we'll be fine. Of course, then everybody leaves and Zeke starts thinking about what he should do individualistically. And since this system actively encourages and rewards self-interested behavior, he knows damn well that all of the actors are going to do what's in their own best interest. So he knows what he's got to do. And we know how this story ends, except this time it's on a much larger scale, because rather than fixing the problem, they just pushed it up, masked it. And when you continue to build on that society, we know that the tragedy of the commons is caused by self-interested behavior. And the more self-interested behavior there is, the more susceptible you are to the tragedy of the commons. So when you build a society that not only encourages but explicitly rewards self-interested behavior, you're creating selective pressures so that those in power will increasingly be more and more self-interested people. And it pushes the tragedy of the commons to higher and higher levels so that when disaster does strike, it's even more tragic. So when the experts are telling everybody that we need to shut everything down for the good of the society, I'm just doing what's best for me, or I'm just doing what's best for my family, turns into I'm just doing what's best for my company or my corporation, which turns into I'm just doing what's best for my country. And this collective building of one fragile system on top of another fragile system on top of another fragile system all the way to the top means that something as small as a virus can threaten to crash the whole system. And while more and more people are stuck at home watching the collapse of so many systems that they once took for granted, there's this realization that the effects of our reaction to the virus are worse than the effects of the virus itself. And so while it's morbid, there's a certain logic to saying that, well, doing nothing would lead to a small percentage increase in deaths worldwide, and that's a terrible cost to pay. It's not as great of a cost as complete economic or societal collapse. But the logic of that idea is no different than saying everyone just needs to reduce grazing from 3 days to 2 days, and they will weather the storm no problem. Just stop hoarding, this is insane. We're going to need to reduce our water consumption by 25% each. Or we just need to reduce global emissions and we'll avert the most disastrous outcomes of global warming. Because, well, in each of these scenarios, the collective action is obvious. The best collective action is obvious. That action cannot possibly be achieved through the summation of individualistic efforts, as long as everyone is acting in their own self-interest. So even if we all agree that the best collective action we can take is to just let the coronavirus run its course, and we accept that there will be an increase in deaths, and that's a tragedy, but it's a better option than letting the whole economy collapse. Even if we all agree that this is the best course of action, as tragic as it may be, that action still requires the summation of a bunch of individualistic efforts. And that triggers a different kind of tragedy of the commons, where the resource that is in shortage is medical care. And public health experts will announce to everybody that the socially responsible behavior is to not seek medical treatment unless absolutely necessary. But it's in each individual's personal best interest to continue to seek medical treatment, and it's in everybody's personal best interest to hoard medical supplies and other things that might keep them safe. And it's in everybody's personal best interest to minimize their personal exposure to and minimize their personal risk to the disease, letting everybody else keep the economy running. So the idea of doing nothing and letting the virus run its course wouldn't have done anything to save the economy. The economic collapse has really kind of been inevitable from the start. And just like the drought in the original example didn't cause the fragility in that system, it only exposed it. The coronavirus hasn't created this fragility in our system. It also has only exposed the fragility that has always been there. So the short-term moral of the story is to practice socially responsible behavior instead of acting out of your own personal self-interest. And that might require some pretty unfamiliar and scary top-down authority in order to accomplish. But the long-term moral of the story, and perhaps the more important moral of the story, is that at some point we're going to start having to rebuild our society. And we want to make sure that we don't continue to mask the fragility and leave it unaddressed or increase the fragility. We need to learn from our mistakes and build a system that is better. We need to fight back against the privatization of common resources that belong to everybody. We need to stop idolizing and rewarding those members of the society who prove to act most selfishly. The power to manage and distribute common goods should be given to those that prove themselves capable and motivated to do so in a manner that favors fairness and equality, not those motivated by personal profit and greed. And we should be wholly intolerant of any of those leaders who run away from transparency and try to conduct their business in the dark, or who actively make efforts to keep the public uninformed and confused by injecting misinformation and contradicting the experts all the time. And from the bottom up, culturally, we need to stop worshiping economic growth at all costs, because those costs are real. And if the economic growth is fueled by individualism and self-interest behavior, then it's not solving or mitigating the problem of the tragedy of the commons or the risks. It is, in fact, just masking them and increasing the fragility of that system and increasing the impact of any collapse that would happen within that system. So collectively and individually, each of us, we need to stop treating individualism like it's some kind of virtue. We need to stop justifying our own selfish behaviors or excusing the selfish behaviors of others because of excuses like, I'm just doing what's best for me, or I'm just doing what's best for my family, I'm just doing what's best for my company or my corporation, I'm just doing what's best for my country. Because right now we're focused on fighting a virus, but we're already starting to realize that the consequences of the virus are nothing compared to the consequences of the tragedy of the commons. And someday, hopefully sooner rather than later, we will beat this virus, though it won't be without tragic loss. But when that day comes, when this virus situation is behind us, if we try to go back to things as they were, if we try to go back to normal, if we don't hold accountable those who masked and increased the fragility of the system for personal gain, if we continue to insist that individualism is a virtue, then this will not be the last time that we succumb to the tragedy of the commons. The coronavirus is like our canary in the coal mine, and we need to heed its warning that our societal, our cultural, and our economic systems have become too individualistic, and that makes them fragile and unsustainable. And while some of that change is going to have to come from top-down leadership, it can affect change from the bottom up too, in our families and in our friendships and social circles. We can discourage individualism, and we can encourage each other to act socially responsible even when it isn't personally beneficial. This virus has shown us in no uncertain terms just how interconnected and interdependent we are on a global level. So we need to stop pretending that we're a bunch of independent mavericks in some old Western movie and realize we're all in this together, so let's act like it. And the best parts of humanity are when we sacrifice our own personal interests for the betterment of the society and for the betterment of others. The tragedy of the commons is a problem that simply cannot be solved through individualistic efforts. We need to come together and be better. Well, I hope my little story helped illustrate the tragedy of the commons and the leading role it's taking in a lot of today's events. We're all being affected by this tragedy in some way or another. We're all paying the costs for having lived in a fragile system and for the greed and ignorance and selfishness and individualism that covered up that fragility and increased that fragility. It's the worst parts of humanity that got us into this mess, but it's the best parts of humanity that can get us out of this mess. And when we get out of it, it's the best parts of humanity that are going to have to build a better society so we don't have this problem again. Thanks for hearing me out, and good luck out there, guys.